I'm going to continue with the Code Talker, where we let off, and the chapter we were on was on Bougainville. When they located the source of a Navajo code message, they tried to take it out. The day Bill Toledo and I relayed that message, the last of those 4 rules probably saved our lives. No sooner had we shut off the radio, untied it from the tree, and moved, than a Japanese mortar round landed behind us, right where we had been sending and receiving. Those 2 months on Bougainville were so hard and strange. It wasn't just the Japanese attacks. The earth itself seemed displeased at the warfare being waged upon it. The deep mud that sucked at our feet, the swarms of insects, the eruptions of the volcano were like messages of the island's unhappiness. On December 6th, the whole place began to quiver underfoot like a giant animal trying to shake fleas from its back. I was on a little hill in the jungle with several other Marines looking down on the valley below, which was still in Japanese hands. Until the quake, we'd seen no signs of the enemy. That changed as the ground shook and rolled, and the tall palm trees in the valley began to whip back and forth. "Look at that," Smitty said, pointing down into the valley. Japanese snipers who had been tied in, high up among the palm fronds, were falling out of the tops of those trees like coconuts. It probably seemed to them, as it did to me, like the end of the world. However, that earthquake ended after only a few moments. Some of the men who had lived in California were used to earthquakes, and they laughed at us. But even the California boys did not climb back into their foxholes that night for fear the earth might move again and bury them alive. The construction battalions, the CBs, were working hard. In no time at all, they'd put up piers, a mess hall, warehouses, and a hospital where there'd been nothing but jungle a few days before. It was amazing what those CBs could do in such a short time. I really appreciated them, for they made all of our lives a lot easier. Some of the men in the 2nd Raider Regiment of our 3rd Marine Division even made a tall wooden sign out of spare planks salvaged from packing crates. They put it where you could see it from the water. It read, "So when we reach the Isle of Japan, with our caps at a jaunty tilt, we'll enter the city of Tokyo on the roads the CBs built." The CBs also built a base for PT boats on Puritano Island. PTs were fast little patrol boats that were heavily armed. The men who commanded them were the bravest and most reckless boatmen in the Navy. They had no armor at all, but relied on their speed and maneuverability in battle. One morning, late in November, 2 PTs came in escorting a landing craft that had just rescued some Marines who had been trapped on a riverbank. Another of my white buddies attached to our Signal Corps unit was there with me. Smitty, that same blonde Marine from Boston I'd first met at Camp Elliott. I was seeing a lot of Smitty on Bougainville. Ever since our 3rd day on Cape Torokina, either he or Georgia Boy had been by my side most of the time. Years later, I found out that Smitty had a double assignment. His job was not just to serve in our Signal Corps unit, but also to watch over me and protect me, not from the Japanese, but from other Marines who might mistake me for an enemy in disguise because of my brown skin and the sort of Asian look a lot of us Navajos have. "See that fellow there?" Smitty said, cocking his thumb at a red-headed lieutenant behind the wheel of one of the PT boats. "His father is Joe Kennedy. His family runs our whole state of Massachusetts, but he's out there risking his life in those motorized egg crates. You know the last boat he was in got sunk? He gets out of this war alive, he'll probably be our next senator. Want to meet him? Likes Indians." I shook my head. I was shy back then around people I didn't know. So Smitty and I just stood and watched from a distance as that young brown-haired lieutenant climbed out of his boat and went up the pier to the mess hall without noticing us. You know, grandchildren, Smitty was right. Just 2 years later, that brown-haired young man was elected to Congress and eventually became President of the United States. So I suppose you could say that John F. Kennedy was the most famous man I almost met. I never visited the White House while JFK was president, for our story was still top secret in those years. I was not invited to Washington to meet the president until many years later. Things kept moving ahead. The CBs finished the small airfield at Cape Torokina and were almost done with the bigger one at Piva that would handle bombers. On December 26, the orders were given for the Marines to pack up. We established the American presence on the island and pushed the Japanese back. From here on in, Army units would take over. The doggies wouldn't have it easy, but the hardest part had been done. Airstrikes from Bougainville would soon be hitting the main Japanese base at Rabaul, so hard that it would have wiped out. We finally had time to relax. For the first time in weeks, we could bathe, get fresh clothing, and sleep without fear of attack. Best of all, mail call brought me a letter from my parents. The letter read, "Dear son, all is good with us. We are glad for the pay money you send us. We are all eating well and are in health. We are continually praying in church for your safety and for all the other Navajo boys over there. We are praying for your quick return home." I smiled at the P.S. written on the bottom of the letter, because my parents could not themselves write English. They had dictated it to my sister, who was now in her 6th year of school. P.S. Big brother, I am writing this for our mother and father, just as they have said it to me. I wish I could be there with you. School is so boring. I have the same teachers you had, and they are just as bad as you said. I can't wait for you to get home and tell me about your adventures. Then I will not be bored. Return soon. I would not be returning home soon. I'd already gotten my orders. I had to train for a landing on yet another island. But although I could not go home, I did the next best thing. I packed my unwashed combat fatigues and sent them to my family with a note. Dear parents, here are my clothes, still stained with the sweat and mud and blood of Bougainville. Please use these to stand for me in protection ceremony. On the day when prayers and songs would be offered to ask help for me, my clothes would be there in the hands of my family. On that day, I would feel the presence of the holy people, even though I was an ocean away from my home. Chapter 19. Do you have a Navajo? From Bougainville, the other code talkers and I went back to Hawaii. There were more changes in our code to make up, learn, and share. Words had to be added for new weapons, military terms, and situations of war. Armored tracers, napalm, each had to have its equivalent in Navajo. Among those new words was one that we'd grown to know far too well. Abzia, that means pick 'em off. It was our code word for sniper. Just saying it made me want to duck my head down, remembering my recent experience on Bougainville. Our Navajo secret code that had begun with a vocabulary of only 265 words was now almost twice that size. Code talkers were in such demand that recruiters were having a hard time finding enough qualified Navajos. Although many commanders had been hesitant at first about trusting Navajos with their most crucial messages, they'd learned to depend on us. Situations in the field had shown our worth. For example, there was the time back on Bougainville when we Marines took a crucial enemy position quicker than anyone expected. Right after our first squad occupied that spot, shells began to hit all around us. Those shells were from our own artillery. This was back before that particular captain in charge was really confident about having an Indian on the radio. I was with them, but they had me carrying a rifle, not a radio. The radio man at the front was not a Navajo, but a white guy named McAdams. McAdams cranked up his set and radioed back, "We are Americans, stop the artillery." But those shells just kept on coming. They'd gotten so many phony messages sent by Japanese soldiers who spoke perfect English that they thought it was just an enemy trick. McAdams kept begging them to quit shooting at us, but the shells just kept whistling in. Finally, a message was sent back to McAdams from the artillery. "Do you have a Navajo?" "Somebody get Begay up there," the captain yelled, "on the double." I came running, Smitty right behind me. I handed him my rifle, grabbed hold of the microphone, and started talking code. I no longer remember exactly what I said, but a minute later, the shelling stopped. From then on, the captain was sold on us, code talkers. When Marine Corps headquarters asked for recommendations from their generals in the field about the code talker program, the responses were unanimous. "We need more code talkers now," they said. Some of the things those generals wrote made me feel so good that I almost laughed out loud. Remember, grandchildren, like so many other Navajos, I had grown up hearing only criticism and hard words about our people. We Navajos were stupid, we were lazy, we could not be taught anything, we could never be as good as any white man. To hear what was now being said truly made the sun shine in my heart. The Navajos have proved to be excellent Marines, intelligent, industrious, and easily taught to send and receive by key and excellent in the field. That's what the commanding general of the 6th Marine Division put in his official report. It was recommended that every signal company have 8 code talkers. Code talkers should be in every regiment and battalion, from artillery and anti-tank battalions to engineer regiments and scout companies. Each Marine Division was expected to have at least 100 code talkers. On Hawaii, I heard some of what would happen in the campaign to take the far end of New Britain Islands so that Rabaul could be under attack from both sides. In the landing at Cape Gloucester, the fighting afterwards, our code talkers did a lot. The Navajos on New Britain Island not only sent messages by radio and telephone, sometimes they even carried them by hand, running from one position to another. It was dangerous work, for not only was there danger of enemy fire, but also the chance that another Marine might mistake a Navajo for an enemy. I was glad that I had Smitty and Georgia Boy watching my back on Bougainville. Otherwise, what happened to Alex Williams on New Britain Island could have happened to me. It was night, Alex said to the group of us sharing stories as we sat looking at the ocean one evening. There was a heavy rainstorm. The Japanese were attacking and I had to get a message to 2nd Battalion. Just then, though, wouldn't you know it, my radio went out. So I had to take the message to them on foot, Alex continued. That wasn't so bad, but on my way back I got lost. I was crawling around in the dark trying to find my way when I ran into another Marine. He stared wide-eyed at my face. Password, he growled. The password that night was lame duck, so I said it, but if he still thought I was a phony, you blankety-blank son of a gun, he snarled. Then he struck me right in the back with a bayonet. Before it could sink in, I rolled headfirst into a foxhole. Luckily, I landed on top of Sergeant Curtis, followed close after by that bayonet-wielding jarhead thirsty for my blood. What the heck's this, Sergeant Curtis growled. This guy thinks I'm Japanese, I said. I was glad that Sergeant Curtis was a big man, because I was able to keep him between me and that other Marine. Alex shook his head as he reached to rub his shoulder blade where that bayonet had grazed him. Sergeant Curtis told the guy I was right, but I still spent the rest of the night in the foxhole. At times, when I was back on Hawaii, I felt as if things around me were not real. It was too quiet and beautiful. There were no guns being fired, no shells exploding around me, no muddy foxholes. I was with other Navajos, and we were speaking our sacred language together. I should have been happy, but instead it made me feel ill at ease. I found myself wondering what was happening to Georgia Boy and Smitty, because they were not Navajos. They had not been sent to Hawaii as I had been. But I no longer thought of them as white men strangers. They were friends and fellow Marines, and I wished they could have enjoyed some of the beauty and peace that was around me at Pearl. Another of the hard things about being in war, grandchildren, is that although there are times of quiet when the fighting has stopped, you know you will soon be fighting again. Those quiet times give you the chance to think about what has happened. Some of it you will rather not think about, as you remember the pain and the sorrow. You also have time to worry about what will happen when you go into battle again. I'm sure that's why so many Marines drank heavily when they were in the midst of those quiet times. When they were drunk, they no longer could think of those things. Some of our Navajo code talkers joined in that heavy drinking. After the war, they still kept on with that drinking to try to keep the terrible world of war out of their minds. Never think that war is a good thing, grandchildren. Though it may be necessary at times to defend our people, war is a sickness that must be cured. War is a time out of balance. When it is truly over, we must work to restore peace and sacred harmony once again. I was not one of those who tried to forget through drinking, although I was tempted. 1 or 2 beers, or sometimes just a cold bottle of Coca-Cola, was enough for me. What helped me through those times of uncertainty were thoughts of my home and family. It comforted me to know that my family was praying for me during those times. I felt close to them when I rose each morning and used core pollen at dawn. In that way, even when I was sad and afraid, I kept in mind that the holy people would not forget me. Being a Navajo and keeping to our Navajo way helped me survive not just the war, but all those times of quiet and anxious waiting that were not yet peace.